I hope you're having a great day. You should be able to see this on Sunday, but if you see it after that, it's totally fine. I'm glad that you popped in. It's good to see you. I hope you're having a great day, a restful weekend, all of the things. I'm coming back because I want to have a discussion about something really quick. Uh, Shout out to Cardi, who just had her baby boy with Stefan Diggs. And, she popped out. They have pictures of her in the gym and all types of stuff. And there's all of this rhetoric around her having her baby. Shout out to Megan Thee Stallion, who also has come through this point of this case, and specifically her case with Tory Lanez. And, he went ahead and he filed his appeal. And, of course, the schizo fans have been entertaining this whole idea that he would get off an appeal, that there was new evidence, all of these things. The bulk of us that have been paying attention really understood that there wasn't any eureka left, but to each their own. But the appeal was denied. Um, and so inside of that, we're seeing this reemergence of conversation about what's wrong with these women. And another person I'm going to add to this conversation is MVP, Madam Kamala. Um, because what I want to talk about today is the other side of vindication. You know, I've been having a lot of conversation with y'all about my psych classes and everything else that I'm learning, and I try my best to bring these thoughts and ideas forward because I believe that, when we used to hear about the battle of the flesh, the spirit and the flesh, in church and that sort of thing, I've always chucked it up to, just our sexual desires, if I'm being honest, right? I always felt like it was really just about our inability to not be carnal in that reproductive sense, right? But the more I learn about things like conditioning and stress disorders and addiction loops and all of these things, the more I learn about that kind of stuff, the more I understand that this battle between the spirit and the flesh goes a lot deeper than most of us even realize. So again, my favorite part is conditioning. I'm always talking to y'all about the significance of if somebody says something to you enough times repeatedly under certain circumstances, you will believe them, right? So when you get into arguments and people are emotionally heightened or you feel like overwhelmed, when someone says something to you, notice how it stands out. There's actually some brain functions that support that and make that valid. So essentially, your flight and fight is kicked up. When things happen, your synaptic firing between the incident, your fight or flight response, and your hippocampus, which holds your memories, they spark up and they get a lot stronger. They work a lot faster. So there's this process of potentiation and that sort of thing. And it's a little bit more thorough, but that's not entirely why I'm here, right? In understanding how this loop works and seeing this relationship, things like anxiety and personality and mood disorders, they all start to make a little bit more sense. And worst of all, I'm starting to see the significance or the correlation between abusive relationships, addiction, and how external validation and entitlement kind of work together and become problematic, right? So, vindication has always taken on this happily ever after kind of notion, but we really do discount the amount of staining that happens once you've dealt with the mistreatment or the aggravation of a certain circumstance, right? So while we've come to understand that, a jury of the pairs in California found Tory guilty, he lost his appeal. There are still people that are still having this conversation about Megan Thee Stallion not telling the truth. It's nuts to me. It's crazy to me. But this is the nature of being vindicated. Like the other side of vindication does not include this happily ever after where everything shuts down. Same thing with Cardi. We have her make the decision that she's not going to stay in the dynamic that makes her unhappy, that makes her miserable, but she has admittedly stated that wasn't all bad, but in those moments that it was, it has hurt her in a lot of ways. And even though she has moved on, and even though she has stepped in her full imperfection, right, by having a baby with someone else while still married, somehow, some way, we still have Offset posting and talking about her. And I just can't understand how we are stuck in this loop. We are even watching the socioeconomic structure of the United States of America collapse to its motherfucking knees. I'm trying to learn not to curse too much so that I could let these videos go further. But even with all that is happening inside of America, we have people still talking to Madam Kamala and trying to get her to gotcha about the fact that Joe Biden wasn't equipped. There's no way that you guys are still talking about Joe Biden, and we are ripping the economy to shreds in less than a year. Because the other side of vindication is not this happily ever after. Because you see, when we start to talk about external validation and entitlement, when you start to deal with egos and people feeling like, no, I know what I'm talking about, even when you forfeit, like, you know what? Yeah, for sure, you got it. And you choose not to engage with them, it's still not enough. You end up being in so many circumstances where you like, how can I get out of this situation? But the problem is that certain people's presence is clearly disruptive in the fallacy or in the worldview of other people, whether it be a spouse, whether it be a working peer, whether it be a friend, family member, and so on. Relationships or people being aware of you and your existence, and you not being the thing that supported them, uplifted them, or you aren't their accessory anymore, it starts to get a little bit complicated. And here's what I think too. Dare I say that we stop looking at empathy through this vision of absolute kindness. I think that if we take empathy out of the context of being specific and exclusive to kindness, then we might have a better thinking through, a better pathology of thinking about and understanding how abusive people work. You see, because when I think about it, right, Cardi dropped a bar in one of her songs. She's like, yo, you was my twin, but the evil version, talking about her ex-husband. Well, her ex, that not quite her ex yet. You was my twin, but the evil version. When you listen to Meg said, we bonded over the passing of our mothers. And you have Kamala who says, I grew up as a Black woman in the home with my mother and sister, and we had to make ends. I know what the experience of the average American actually is. If we take that, it makes perfect sense that people would see the empathy. The problem is, the people that you tell your story to, it's not that they don't understand you, they understand you fully, but they're not looking for partnership, they're looking for usefulness. Not understanding the difference between becoming an accessory to a person and being a friend or a love interest or a partner, again, to that person. Being able to discern when you are just useful to somebody is so important, because I think that all of these are perfect examples, and especially for women, of why you need to make a decision on if you are comfortable. Because I also don't want to take away from the fact that some people like the idea of being useful. And if that works for you, babe, to the moon, and I wish you all the best. Do your thing. But if you are a person like myself, I said to my sister the other day, I said, I need to be close to people where my hypervigilance is safe. Because in me understanding things like stress disorders, I'm understanding that, girl, your need to make sure that people are okay is the same thing that people see in you and use you for. And a lot of times we don't realize that, damn, I never thought that my good gestures would only bring in bad people. And better yet, it goes a bit further, because you see, it's not just about the fact that I'm hypervigilant and it's like, oh, you bring it. No, it's the people that also go through things like you that don't have the same outcomes as you. So in my instance, where I'm hypervigilant because I would rather alleviate the stress from you, I'm thinking like, if I meet other people that have gone through similar walks of life and have similar interests, we will look through the same lenses, because you expect empathy to look the same in everybody that has been through what you have been through. But, hun, that is not the case. Because when you look at empathy through the reality that it is the existence of the ability to understand what someone has been through, and not that it exclusively means that that person is kind or good for you, then you recognize that shit. Not everybody that's been through what I've been through looks at life the way I look at life. As simple as it is, as recurring as the thought might be, here we are. Here we are looking at an economy. We got Donica Lewinsky going on. We got all types of, we have this radicalization. We have this disbelief. We have toxic relationships where folks won't let go, where people are weaponizing social media to further abuse people that they are broken up with and make them look crazy, compromise their brands and their opportunities. We're watching this happen and unfold in real time. And so, recognize the difference between people that are learning to be accountable for their imperfections versus the ones that believe in re-victimization. Because one thing I learned about stress disorders, specifically attached to anxiety, is that re-victimization is actually a part of the mental health condition, right? Things like rumination, shame, and guilt become the core of a lot of mental health conditions. And not everybody that feels shame and guilt retreat or withdraw or hide themselves, right? There are people that experience shame and guilt and they lash out because fight or flight is the fear response. That is when your amygdala is making a decision for you. So things like worry, fear, doubt, guilt, shame, they are all iterated in that part of the brain and have this response. Some people hide, some people punch. And I think that recognizing that your attachment to that person does not necessarily mean that you will strengthen their grit or their endurance, but you might actually just be enabling their entitlement. So remember, love without accountability is enablement. And in a lot of cases, it looks like post-separation abuse. So I'm rooting for everybody Black. And I hope that things get better for Cardi and Meg, Kamala, all of the above. Because I think that we're going to be in a pretty long fight. But it doesn't mean that you won't win eventually. And it don't mean that you're not winning already. So in the meantime, I hope you have a great day. And I'll see you in the next one.